Hi, my name is Ted Grossman. I'm a principal at the Alexander Group. I'm here with my colleague, Davis Giedt. Davis, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Ted. Hi, everyone. I lead our analytics and research practice, which focuses on doing research and benchmarking in a variety of different industries, including quite a bit in the tech industry, which we're going to tell you a little bit about today.
Yeah. So just a little bit about the Alexander Group for those of you who might not know us. We're a management consulting firm, but we have a unique set of offerings, consulting being our primary business. But we also host a number of different types of events. In addition to that, we provide research, and the research is what we're going to focus in on today. That usually entails both practices and metrics and benchmarks to help you plan and run your organizations. We're going to kick off a series of 7 episodes on metrics and practices for profitable revenue growth within the X as a service business model. Let me explain what the series is going to do. We're going to have this first one, which is to kick it off and really talk a little bit about the methodology and what's in the type of metrics and the types of practices you can expect and how you can use them. We'll then talk about, in our second episode, how to drive profitable growth and how it links to valuation for your business. In the third and fourth episodes, we're going to really focus on how do you drive that profitable growth into the idea of acquiring net new customers and new logos. In our fifth and sixth series, we'll really talk about the install base, and we'll talk about how you manage churn, and also we'll have a special focus on customer success as it's become one of the key topics in the industry these days. Lastly, in our last one, we'll wrap it all up, and we'll talk again about what are the best practices that are supporting all these metrics, and how do you use those metrics and practices to actually improve your valuation.
So we have 3 main categories of metrics. We report on upwards of 50 or 60 metrics. The first set of revenue, cost, and productivity metrics are those that organizations and leaders use to manage their business and drive strategic changes. So there you're going to see lots of talk about customer acquisition costs and sales expenses, productivity on a per seller basis, efficiency of the organization, looking at it from an expense to revenue and expense to bookings basis. We also look at net revenue retention and churn rates. In the roles and headcount section, that is very close to the structural changes that organizations make and structural implications for go-to-market models. So there we look at quite a few headcount ratios and coverage ratios. So understanding how many support roles are in the organization compared to organic reps, customer success resources, lead generation, field marketing, sales engineers, channel reps, and the like. And then biggest component of cost within any organization is human capital. So we have a separate section focused on sales compensation where we look at both pay levels as well as pay mix and compensation design to sort of understand how organizations are paying their sales and related people.
One thing, where do we get our data? Where do we get our practices? Well, a lot of it we get from our projects, and we compile them and aggregate data up in a database. Obviously very private and secure, so we only show aggregated results. Secondly, we maintain our data and to keep it fresh. We go out to our client base every year with an annual study. This is actually part of that. And in doing so, what we do is we ask companies to send us their data. We review it and normalize it. We also ask them about their practices. And then in return for that, we can provide a benchmarking report back out to them that goes into greater depth, comparing themselves to different cohorts within the industry. We're here today as part of a second installment around a series for metrics and practices to improve X as a service profitability and growth within the tech industry. And specifically, this topic is about valuation and 4 key metrics that we've identified as the most important for driving valuation for your company, but key metrics that can be used by chief revenue officers, sales officers, to really ensure that the things that they are doing and managing to are going to actually drive the growth and valuation of the company.
So one thing that we found in our research is that as a service, leaders are striving for higher valuation via balancing growth and margins. So investors are no longer rewarding growth by itself. They're rewarding a balance of having growth and margin in the model. What companies are doing is they're now looking at setting annual growth and margin goals that are challenging but also achievable. So one concept that has been pretty important and popular in the marketplace recently has been the notion of what we're calling the growth and margin index. So it's looking at free cash flow or EBITDA margin as a percentage of revenue plus year-over-year revenue growth rate or ARR growth rate, and seeing where those land. An investment firm, Piper Jaffray, a couple of years ago did a big analysis on publicly traded pure play as a service companies and found that 50% of companies exceeded 40% as a sum of free cash flow margin percentage of revenue and ARR growth rate. And those 50% of companies made up 80% of the total market value, so they were extremely highly valued by investors. In our research, we found that 50% of companies and related companies that exceed the rule of 40 in terms of growth and margin have four sort of key characteristics or mandates that they follow. The first one is driving high seller productivity, and they measure that by looking at ACV growth bookings on a per seller basis. The second one is managing to cost of sales, and they look at that a few different ways, but the main one is looking at sales and marketing expense to revenue or to ARR. The third thing that they do really well is they efficiently acquire new revenue, both from new customers and existing customers. And they measure this by looking at customer acquisition cost ratios and then also how much they spend on demand stimulation. So the part of the marketing and sales organization specifically focused on gaining new business. And the last thing, last but certainly not least, is they maintain and grow existing accounts. And they measure this by looking at net revenue retention, which is essentially how well on a net basis companies are growing revenue from existing accounts.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I guess one of the things that would be I'd ask is, how do we know that these are the four key metrics, or why are these ones? How did we identify these as four key metrics as opposed to many other things that you might want to measure?
Yeah, very good question. So obviously, Ted, we look at the go-to-market models within organizations, and we took a lot of data from our recent research that we've done on companies that have exceeded the rule of 40 and looked at a bunch of different characteristics. And these were the ones that popped out as being quite commonplace among the companies that meet or exceed the rule of 40.
Yeah. I'm here today to talk about how XaaS companies are maximizing their valuation through a focus on key go-to-market practices and metrics. This is part 3 of a series, which is specifically focused on new logo acquisition and maximizing customer lifetime value. Davis, tell us a little bit about what metrics we're talking about.
Thanks, Ted. So under the optimizing new logo acquisition umbrella, today we're going to be talking about using lifetime value, customer acquisition costs, and payback period, and a combination of those to understand how efficient and effective your new logo acquisition model is. So we found that investors care quite a bit about having their XaaS leaders track customer acquisition costs, payback period, as well as lifetime value and some of the metrics that you can calculate using a combination of those. So in particular, in a land and expand model where companies are selling potentially a smaller upfront deal and then hoping to expand in a recurring revenue setting in the out years, keeping customer acquisition costs, otherwise known as CAC, low relative to lifetime value is really key to driving growth and profitability. In terms of where people are investing to reduce customer acquisition costs, we're seeing a lot of focus on digital engagement portals, so ways for potential customers to get engaged with product and with the solution in a digital self-service manner, which is a lot cheaper and more scalable. We're also seeing people investing in dedicated resources, so specialized, digitally enabled sales development or market development reps to own lead generation, which is a lower cost way than having core sales reps handle that by themselves. In terms of increasing lifetime value, XaaS companies are focusing on reducing churn and driving expansion. So they're focusing on making sure that they don't have a leaky bucket problem where they're losing customers as soon as they come in. They're also focusing on making sure that they are getting upwards of 20% growth on existing accounts year over year via upsell and cross-sell. Two of the metrics that we've found that companies are tracking most closely, the first one is the CAC payback period, so customer acquisition cost payback period. And what this is just looking at how long it takes to get a return on investment on customer acquisition costs. So it's measured in terms of how many months it takes to gain enough gross margin to break even on the cost of acquiring one new customer. So we found that most as a service companies do this in about a year to a year and a half, roughly. If it goes over that, it tends to be a little bit unprofitable for the business, and that's something that they want to look at. The second metric that's arguably the most important here is looking at lifetime value over customer acquisition costs. This is effectively kind of measuring the ROI of sales and marketing investments in a particular organization. And that tends to run in the 2.5 to 3 to 4 range. If you're bringing in lifetime value, meaning the total value of revenue in the likely lifetime of a customer, that's 3 times the cost of acquiring that customer, you're probably doing okay relative to the market and on this particular metric.
Davis, are companies getting better at this? What's the trend?
There's definitely been improvement. Companies have decreased their CAC payback periods probably by 10 or 15%, and the LTV to CAC ratio has gone up, particularly among higher growth companies that are focused on this. It's gone up upwards of 20 or 30% in the last couple of years.
I think this is probably attributed to some of the things that you were talking about, the use of technology, a focus on higher quality lead generation, and also a focus on customer success and other types of roles that really help drive expansion within accounts and reduce churn. Is that right?
Absolutely. We're seeing correlations between investing in customer success and post-land resources. So post-land account management, customer success, and technical resources, and increased net revenue retention, which means growth from existing accounts, which in turn increases lifetime value of a customer, which also improves your LTV to CAC ratio.
Well, Davis, thanks. This is 2 really important sets of metrics that companies are using.
We're here today to talk about an ongoing series that we have on metrics and practices for profitable as-a-service growth. And specifically today, we're going to talk about new logo optimization and how investing in lead generation and digital process and technology can assist with that. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to you, Davis.
The first thing we're going to talk about today is about how the traditional sales development rep is evolving to be more of a digitally enabled prospect engagement rep. In the traditional world in tech, we're finding that sales development reps spend most of their time focused on executing outbound and inbound lead generation through kind of traditional lead dialing and email campaigns. I mentioned most of their time is spent on identifying and landing new customers. We found in the last couple of years, there's a pretty big gap between top performing lead generation companies and the rest of the market, in that the top performing companies have evolved their traditional sales development rep towards a digitally enabled prospect engagement rep. What that means is that these reps create a rich, interactive virtual sales experience for prospects using a variety of tools. In addition to that, they spend their time targeting both new logos as well as new and unfamiliar buyers within existing accounts. They also happen to spend considerably more of their time in engaged selling due to a lot of the efficiencies they gain through digital engagement with customers.
When you think about this, it feels to me like this is less of a volume play and more of a quality play. It's, we're using a lot of propensity tools, identifying people up front and getting to the right people with the right message more effectively. And that's actually part of the SDR's role in addition to marketing. Is that a fair assessment?
What we're seeing in these top performing companies is the volume of leads is going up, but also the percentage of those leads that turns into qualified sales opportunities and ultimately closed deals is going up as well.
The skill set of a digitally enabled prospect engagement rep is significantly higher. And so these are not necessarily your people who you hire out of college, give them a month of training and then they're off to the races. These are people with a little bit more experience. Is that what you're seeing as well?
It's not unlike what we've seen as companies transition from a hybrid to a pure play, and they have to hire and retain new talent to sell the sort of newer SaaS related products. We're seeing that this digitally enabled prospect engagement rep has to be able to engage with customers on multiple different fronts whether it be traditional via the phone or digital via the web and interactive chat to create that virtual sales experience that's so valuable today.
And tell me a little bit more about the second topic we wanted to hit here.
We're finding that top companies or top revenue leaders are striving for end-to-end digital customer tracking. So they're having their lead generation organization engage with customers more digitally. They're collecting all this great information, and they are the top companies are using that information all the way through the buyer journey. So from prospect engagement to close of the initial deal, all the way through customer adoption and customer success, and through it to renewal and expansion. We break the companies into kind of three different groups when we think about end-to-end digital customer tracking, and only about 10% fall into the leaders. The first group are the observers. So think of these as companies that are having C-suite discussions about digital transformation and end-to-end customer tracking. They've made some investments in tools, but overall they have relatively disparate and kind of redundant reporting, as well as limited information sharing between departments. The second group would be the followers, and this is about 60% of the companies in our research fall into this category, so the vast majority of them. C-suite has determined that digital transformation and end-to-end customer tracking is a priority. However, they're still seeing pretty decentralized ownership of various tools, digital tools for tracking. So marketing owns tools, sales owns different tools, service owns a different set of tools. But there is a approach to connect between the different departments. So at least a plan for it, and some testing and sort of adaptation going on to drive that connection between. And then the leaders are the last group. As I mentioned, it's only about 10% of companies. In the C-suite, there are champions for digital transformation, and it's a top priority for them. There's typically a multi-year roadmap with clear goals and return on investment for digital transformation and customer tracking. The information flows cleanly between departments. There's usually a data lake that's set up for all new information coming in and then being disseminated out to different departments, as well as connectivity between tools and groups. So lots of information sharing going on in the leadership group there.
And as you start to move yourself from the left to right, you're starting to see, let's just talk about marketing and sales. You're starting to see the collaboration between marketing and sales stronger. And even to the point where the marketing leadership tends to have more at stake with sales results, often having some variable plan, where the head of marketing and some of the leading managers and leaders there are being incented on how the company does it as a whole. So it's not just about how many leads I generate or how many are sales qualified, but are they actually leading to end deals? Is that something you're seeing as well?
Absolutely. I mean, they're breaking down silos between marketing, sales, and service in the leader category. You're seeing the true usage of a CRO type of role. So not just the title, but the actual usage of a CRO role that owns end-to-end marketing, sales, and service across the entire revenue organization as well.
This particular section is on managing net retention and managing churn. And these are some of the most important metrics I think that companies are looking at, especially as they achieve scale, in order to sort of maximize their valuation and ensure that they're going to be profitable and ensure profitable growth. So with that said, we have some discussions on metrics, and we have some discussions on some practices that go with that. And Davis, I think what I'd like to do is open it up with you and maybe start with some definitions and maybe a little bit of data.
Sure. Thanks, Ted. Today is talking about minimizing churn and expanding the base to drive overall growth of the as-a-service business. There are three metrics that we focus on in particular as it relates to this topic. The first one is revenue churn. The second one is expansion rate. And the third one is net revenue retention. Revenue churn is essentially in terms of revenue, how much you lost from your existing customers in a given year. We typically see about an 8% revenue churn rate, meaning you lost 8% of the revenue from an existing group of customers over the lifetime of a year. In terms of a market trend, we've seen that this number has remained steady for the last 2 to 4 years. There are big variations between companies. We typically see best practice at about 5% or below, meaning that 95% or more of revenue is retained from existing customers year over year. The benchmark falls around 8%, and most companies are between the 15% and the 5% range. In terms of best practices on minimizing revenue churn, a lot of companies are focused on mapping and sticking to a dedicated renewals process and mapping activities and roles to that renewals process. So they focus on 5 different stages: renewal qualification, planning, quoting and pricing, closing the renewal, and finally establishing a playbook for the next renewal. The best practice companies in the space typically start this about 180 days out, and they involve a variety of different roles, including the account executive, the customer success manager, and in some cases, a dedicated renewals team as well.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the thing that we've seen in our research and with our client base is the advancement of the rules of engagement. It comes down to it's a team sport. Bringing this up, the account manager has to stay involved in the land and expand model. The customer success person has to make sure that the customer is gaining value and during not just customer success, but actually satisfaction, meeting their needs, etc. And if all that's happening, you still need somebody focusing on the renewal itself just to make sure it happens. And that if there are upsell opportunities, it's being treated properly, either between the renewal rep or the account executive themselves. So, the formalization of this is big, and I think it's a lot more than what traditionally software companies were dealing with when you were just selling, when the recurring part of your business was a maintenance and support. This is actually the whole subscription, so it's a little bit more complicated. Cool. Let's move on to expansion.
Yep. So the expansion rate, as Alexander Group defines it, is on an ARR basis. We look at upsells and cross-sells within existing accounts. So this is not net of churn. Think of your existing accounts, how much you're able to expand them via new products and additional existing products in a given year. Typically see about a 25% expansion rate for accounts that stick around in a given year. We've seen that this number is increasing in the last several years. Companies are focused more and more heavily on expansion. It's truly the lifeblood of growth within a as-a-service model. And we've seen companies are improving their digital coverage and also using new and different roles, including customer success, to drive expansion within existing accounts. One thing in particular that we're seeing companies do at the best practice level is shifting to coordinated use case driven value propositions. So they're focused on driving value chains within organizations that they sell to, selling to multiple different types of buyers, multiple different types of products, and identifying many, many different use cases within organizations and tying them together to create additional value beyond the value created by distinct products or use cases themselves. So in essence, when you tie use cases together into value chains, 1 + 1 = 3.
Yeah. I think a lot of companies we see, they call that platform selling. Sometimes you have to earn the right by getting a land and then you go into a platform sale, but it's certainly something to think about. I just look at the number 125 and I'm thinking like, wow, I just sold a deal last year to somebody and I sold it for $100,000 and now I have to get $125,000 next year. It really sets a standard that I think is North Star for what reps have to do and what the organization has to do in order to continue to grow their business. So that's a great number. So how does this all then come together then with net revenue retention?
Yeah, this is one of the most important numbers that any as-a-service company tracks. And think of it roughly as if you take the expansion rate and you net out the revenue churn, you get to a net revenue retention number, which is essentially measuring the total net change in recurring revenue from existing customers throughout the year, right? You'll see typically 115% or somewhere between 110 and 120% is a healthy net revenue retention for an as-a-service business. Best practice is going to be north of 120%. We've seen this number increasing and pretty dramatically over the last several years, again, as companies continue to focus on retaining and growing the existing customer base. In terms of best practices here, this is really about shifting your organizational mindset as a leader to focus on net revenue retention. We're seeing leaders add this in as one of their top 5 KPIs that they focus on in terms of running the business on a quarterly basis, along with bookings productivity, expense to revenue and expense to bookings ratios, and LTV to CAC ratios, which we talked about in a previous video.
And one thing I think that's really interesting to point out is, NRR being the end all be all of what you're trying to do, it does come down to the two components of how much are you, keeping revenue from churning and how much you can able to expand. But there's a connection between those two. I think, Davis, we also see that, look, companies that have lower churn also have higher expansion rates.
Absolutely.
And it makes sense, of course, because if customers aren't churning, they generally are happier, and it's pretty hard to expand on an account if they're not. So more reason than ever, though, why you need to have strong customer success. We're here today to talk about a sixth part in our ongoing series on metrics and practices for profitable X-as-a-Service growth. Today, we want to dive deep into customer success, the customer success organization, the customer success role, and what are the sort of key practices, and most importantly, what are companies doing to measure customer success. This is a evolving topic, and we get a lot of interest from our clients right now on this. Customer success has been around for many, many years, but in terms of really honing in on what are the true expectations that we expect out of it, it's an ongoing debate, and there's some very interesting information that we're going to present. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Davis, and I think maybe the way to start is to talk about a little bit more existentially, what is the role of customer success? What do we mean by it, and what are the roles? And then we can start getting into some of the practices and some of the metrics that we want to look at. What is the role of customer success?
That's a good question, Ted. In terms of how Alexander Group thinks about it, we break it into mainly 4 categories. Usage, so customers using the solution. Value realization, which is solving a business problem using a solution or product. Customer satisfaction, so having buyers and users have a positive vendor experience. And then renewals and expansion, which is the sales component, in terms of renewing on a subscription basis and expanding the consumption or usage of the product via upsells or cross-sells. Those all sort of translate into maximizing customer lifetime value, which is the ultimate goal of customer success. Today, we're going to focus on the value realization portion of it, of the role of customer success, mostly because it encompasses many of the other elements of the customer success function.
I think a comment and something we hear all the time is value realization is really the nirvana in a subscription or a consumption business. If companies are gaining value from the solution, then obviously they're going to want to keep on doing that and to expand on it. So, but it's a nebulous term. What is value realization? So, this I think this is a good framework. Let's talk a little bit about then how does value realization get reflected across maybe the whole customer engagement?
Yeah, absolutely. We think of it across the 5 stages of the buyer journey. So landing new customers, adopting existing customers, renewing them, upselling them, and cross-selling them. Those are 5 stages of buyer journey as it relates to customer success. And there's a few key activities that go on at each stage. In the land stage, so landing new customers, we see customer success spend a lot of time planning. So they'll create a clear plan for adoption and usage to help close the sale and drive towards successful onboarding of a new customer. In the adoption phase, obviously, this is where customer success spends most of their time. They're driving usage, adoption, satisfaction of the core products by current buyers. So figuring out how to get them up and running initially, and then ultimately maximizing the usage of those products. In the renewal phase, customer success is often assisting with retention and helping to predict churn or prevent churn ahead of the renewal. So if you're doing a good job in the adoption phase, the renewal piece should be relatively easy. We also are seeing customer success roles and just in general, customer success mindset in the upsell part of the buyer journey, as well as the cross-sell part of the buyer journey. Customer success roles are helping to identify the next best use case and pass that information on to a salesperson to help close the deal.
Yeah, one thing I would say is, coming back to value realization, it does start with thinking about it in the land. When you're getting a new account on board, not just understanding what product they're buying, but what does value mean to the customer. So usually that's the role of the AE, maybe the SE and other roles. But the idea of bringing that, the customer success orientation into that to define the value realization. So that's actually what can start to be looked at and adopted. And that's what we mean by success when we get into usage and adoption. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. If you set up the plan very clearly and cohesively in the land stage, the adoption piece becomes a lot easier and more successful, which sort of leads us to our next topic, which is tracking different metrics across the buyer journey, and particularly in the adoption phase, some of the metrics that people track to demonstrate success in their customer success models.
Yeah, and I know it's kind of interesting when I look, at this chart here, number of users, number of use cases, the usage frequency, looking at whatever the unit of consumption might be, which could be a user, or it could be things like, terabytes or amount of storage or, number of CPUs. That's a critical thing, but that's very, very sort of tactical. And that doesn't necessarily tell you whether people are getting value out of it. Yes, they're using it, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're really happy about it. It doesn't mean that there's not a better solution out there. So I see on the right-hand side, you have health score and positive and negative NPS. Maybe just dive into that a little bit, because I think this is pretty interesting.
Yeah, the positive and negative NPS piece is particularly interesting. We're hearing from a lot of our clients that historically, they've been focused on positive net promoter scores. So the likelihood of a customer wanting to recommend a product to family or friends on a scale from 1 to 10. That's the common metric that everyone knows. But a lot of companies are increasingly focusing on negative NPS. So figuring out how to ensure that their most irritated customers or customers that they're not doing so well with, how to bring those up from the bottom to more of a steady state or a healthy state. And that seems to be more efficient as well as more effective in the long run in terms of maintaining customer satisfaction.
Yeah. Now, NPS being potentially only one piece of a health score, some companies do things a little bit more advanced and have negative or positive NPS as part of an overall health score. But the whole idea here is, how do you get value realization into this and not just focus on usage, which I think is a good first step and hard enough to measure on its own, but then, adding these other pieces to it. I think this is a great framework for people to think about. Obviously, customer success in general, having the customer be successful with your solutions is really the goal of this whole thing. Clearly, it is not just the role of the CS organization to do this. And I think having all these metrics over here, just whether they're used for compensation or whether they're used to manage the business, makes a lot of sense. We've talked a lot about valuation, the rule of 40, how growth and profitability, by driving those both up as a go-to-market organization, you'll reach higher valuation. And then how that then translates into different metrics and practices for growing a business, as well as doing it in an efficient and profitable manner. So with that, what we want to do is say, how do we take some of the information we've gotten so far from this series and turn it into an action plan? What can companies do? What can those of you who are listening? With that in mind, I'm going to turn it over to Davis. And Davis, maybe walk through a sort of a simple structure for how companies are doing this and what we suggest.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good question, Ted. We typically see SaaS companies or exit service companies baseline and try and measure against KPIs to understand both growth and profitability levers. And they often will focus more on growth or profitability levers, depending on where they are in their phase of growth, whether the growth is more important to them for valuation or profitability or a combination of both. On the growth side, we typically see organizations focus on new logo acquisition, building up a really high quality lead generation model, the ability to get new customers in the door efficiently and effectively. They focus on account expansion, so upselling and cross-selling existing customers, and they also focus on reducing churn by way of customer success and other best practices. On the profitability side, you'll typically see companies do things like managing sales and marketing costs. So doing a full comprehensive review of the cost profile and understanding where they're getting more productivity and efficiency out of their model and where cost is kind of extra to the model, which leads right into the next topic, which is sales efficiency, looking at expense to revenue ratios. This is a key indicator of profitability. keeping the expense to revenue ratio at a healthy, relatively low level compared to the market. And they also focus in some sense on discounting and bundling. So making sure that they're maintaining a healthy net margin on every sale. In the middle, where companies focus on both growth and profitability, there's a few things that come up, and these are probably the topics that we talk about most commonly with just about every company that we work with. And that's seller productivity is the first one. So focusing on keeping seller productivity in terms of growing net new bookings year over year very high. They also focus on deal efficiency, so having a very efficient pipeline management process, keeping deal sizes large and sales cycles short, managing to net revenue retention, so focusing on reducing churn and expanding accounts to drive high net revenue retention. The last thing is coaching and training is actually a lever for both growth and profitability, in that it allows organizations to maximize selling time, so maximizing their salespeople's customer-facing selling time.
Yeah, so these are a little bit of a mix of some high-level topics and some, what I'd say, some key measures or KPIs, a mix of practices and KPIs. This starts to smack of maybe it's a dashboard. And maybe what companies need to have is a dashboard that includes some of the, specifically laid out in a way that says, what are we doing to focus on growth and how well are we doing there? And then other things that look more at the profitability and the things that affect actually both. Selecting the few KPIs that are going to be the really critical ones for you based upon, as you said, where you are in your maturity. Am I stating that correctly?
Yeah, absolutely. And as you think about building a dashboard, a lot of organizations will break metrics into frequency of measurement. So they'll look at some metrics weekly, deal efficiency metrics come to mind. They might look at some metrics on a quarterly basis, so churn rates and account expansion rates. And they might look at other metrics on more of a half year or annual basis. So looking at expense to revenue rates and seller productivity, for example, that's better done on an annual basis. And yeah, we work with a lot of organizations to help them build out dashboards just like that.
How do I put this all together? What are the next steps I should really take to actualize the benefits of the different measures and practices we've talked about so far?
Yeah, absolutely. There's sort of three main steps. The first one is establishing goals for growth versus profitability. So, looking inward and understanding what is your current organizational focus, and then also thinking about what will be your focus in 2 to 3 years. So you may be a growth organization today, but that may shift in 2 to 3 years from where you're a growth and profitability mixed organization. The second thing to do is to measure and baseline against peers by way of benchmarking. So benchmark your marketing, sales, and service organization across performance, structure, efficiency, and profitability, and other metrics to sort of understand where do you stand today. It's like an initial health assessment. And then the third thing you can do is once you've completed steps 1 and 2 is set goals against key performance indicators that other SaaS companies use. You want to set realistic but challenging goals that drive toward your desired state of thinking about where you want to be in 2 to 3 years.
Yeah, it's interesting because, establishing the goals for growth and profitability, usually the board does that. These are usually sort of high level top down, but I think it's translating that into what are the key metrics that you want to look at. You might want to look at all of them and benchmark against a lot of different metrics, but what are the key ones that are going to be your focus based upon your growth and profitability mix? Is that right? Yeah,
absolutely. And a lot of it's about translating what the board has set into specific goals within the sales, marketing, and service organization that drive directly towards growth or directly towards profitability.
How does AGI help here? And what can people who are participating on listening to this expect maybe from AGI in terms of support or other ways we can help them?
Thinking about understanding key performance indicators for SaaS across growth and profitability, we run an ongoing set of research in the SaaS space focused on a variety of topics, including these metrics and best practices for growth, profitability, and ultimately valuation. It's free to participate for any organization. All you have to do is contact us and we'll get you started. We collect some data from you and understand a little bit about your organization and compare you to a relevant set of companies from our database to sort of understand your baseline and where you stand today. Feel free to reach out to us if you're interested in participating and we can get you set up with the process.
Yeah, that sounds great. And I'll say that as a management consulting practice, we like to collect and have all these benchmarks. It provides value to people immediately when they get a chance to benchmark themselves against the industry. Of course, if you want to take that and work farther along into actual processes, actual dashboards, and things of that nature, we're there to help as well. And otherwise, we wish everyone well. Thank you so much.